So now we have 3 Space Marine armies with dedicated assault doctrines. I think it's time for a bit of comparison and to see which of them do best in different situations. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been taking a look at all the new content that's been coming out for the Space Marines over the last few months. Today I thought we'd do something a little bit different and directly compare the dedicated assault doctrines for Blood Angels, Black Templars and White Scars, to take a look at which are better in different situations. Now I know full well that looking at these in isolation isn't actually getting the full picture. You most certainly have to consider these in addition to the chapter tactic, relics, stratagems, warlord traits and psychic powers available to the chapters. But having a think about which of the doctrines will work best for different units is certainly an important part in the puzzle. Let's start with the White Scars first then. Their unique assault doctrine is called Devastating Charge, and it basically means when you make a charge move, are charged, or perform a heroic intervention, all of your unit's melee weapons get a +1 damage modifier, in addition to the normal assault doctrine bonus of having -1 additional AP on all of your weapons. Now this is a ridiculously powerful doctrine, with its main weakness being that it comes so late in the game on turn 3. I don't believe that White Scars have any current way to access their doctrine before turn 3, which is a major blow. But obviously, as you're adding an extra point of damage to your weapon's characteristics, this is going to come into effect only when you're fighting models that either have more than 1 wound, or have something like a 5+ feel no pain type save, where the extra point of damage can still be useful when targeting 1 wound models such as say Plague Bearers. If we're looking at Space Marines with normal strength 4 attacks, such as Intercessors or Vanguard Veterans with Chainswords, this will just flat double the damage output against anything with 2 wounds, anything with 4 wounds, and anything with a whole ton of wounds such as a vehicle or monstrous creature. Against models with 3 wounds, this will be a 50% damage increase, due to some of the damage being lost in overkill, and against a 1 wound unit with a 5+ feel no pain, say Plague Bearers, it'll increase your damage output by 33% due to the additional feel no pain saves that you'll make them fail. So the White Scars doctrine really makes your standard Space Marines fairly general purpose in terms of the threats that they can deal with. Strength 4 attacks are already pretty decent efficiency at dealing with 1 wound infantry, and this trait will typically double their efficiency against pretty much everything else. When combined with the AP -1 that you get from being in the assault doctrine in the first place, just through sheer weight of attacks you're going to force through a lot of damage on hard targets. So the White Scars doctrine is a big win when you're using damage 1 weapons. If we're looking at heavier weapons, then Devastating Assault is also very powerful. Power Fists will be going up to doing 3 damage average after the D3 roll, so that's a 50% increase against most hard targets with a lot of wounds, and Thunderhammers going up to damage 4 is a 33% increase on an already incredibly powerful weapon. If you're looking at an assault doctrine to buff fighty characters in close combat that are going to be trying to kill hard targets, such as Smash Captains, then the White Scars doctrine is the best of the 3. Of course, when you're using these heavy weapons to target infantry and the like, the White Scars doctrine will similarly give you absolutely no help. It's also no additional benefit when you're using Thunderhammers to take out 2 wound infantry like Primaris Marines, because you're already going to be doing enough damage to ignore that 2 wounds anyway. So overall, the White Scars doctrine is a very strong buff against anything with a ton of wounds such as vehicles, and will also massively help out your regular Space Marines when they're fighting against anything with more than 1 wound. So let's move on to the Black Templars doctrine now. Now the Black Templars one is a bit more complicated than the White Scars to work out. It's called Knights of Sigismund, and this activates whenever you make a heroic intervention or a charge move against a unit that isn't a vehicle. On a quick reread, I've realised that I made a mistake with the White Scars one. That doesn't activate if you're charged, it's only if you charge or make a heroic intervention. Apologies for that. But back to the Black Templars one, this only activates against non-vehicles, and basically means whenever you roll an unmodified hit roll of a 6, it automatically scores a wound, and you don't need to make a wound roll for that roll. Now, Knights of Sigismund is an interesting bonus. It's a real bummer that it doesn't work against vehicles, as this would be the prime target for circumventing high toughness otherwise. Now, how powerful this is depends on how tough the target that you're attacking is. Let's look at normal strength 4 Space Marines first, your Intercessors or your other standard Marines bearing chainswords. If you're attacking a toughness 3 model, so wounding on 3s, Knights of Sigismund isn't all that powerful a buff. It will only give you a 12.5% increase to damage. This is because the 6 roll that you automatically wound for would have had a really good chance of wounding anyway on a 3-op, so it's just not quite as important. If you're targeting a toughness 4 model with a chainsword attack, it's significantly better and will give you a 25% increase to damage output. This is because both the buff that it gives you is bigger and your chance of making all the other wound rolls are lower. Finally, if you're wounding on a 5-up, so say you're fighting against some aggressors or another toughness 5 non-vehicle target, then Knights of Sigismund will actually give you a 50% damage buff, which isn't too bad at all. So compared with the White Scars doctrine, Knights of Sigismund will give you a decent bonus whenever you're fighting 1 wound infantry. Typically Space Marines are going to be wounding on a 3-up or a 4-up, so whenever you are, this will give you a 12.5% or a 25% damage increase respectively. Of course, this is far weaker than the White Scars combat buff if you're targeting anything that's toughness 5 or above, as +1 damage will give these normal chainsword attacks a 100% damage increase or double the damage, whereas Knights of Sigismund will only give you +50% damage, so not quite as strong there. And of course, this doesn't have any effect at all if you're fighting vehicles, which is a shame. If we look at Black Templars fighty characters now, say a captain with a Thunderhammer, the fact that this doesn't help you against vehicles will really be pretty annoying, as vehicles are exactly the sort of thing that he wants to be going after. If he does happen to be hitting something that's a non-vehicle though, if he's wounding on a 2+, say he's fighting against some regular Chaos Space Marines, then Knights of Sigismund will only give him a 5% damage increase, which is pretty underwhelming. And if he's hitting anything that's a non-vehicle and also between toughness 5 and 7, say a Tau Riptide, again he'll be wounding on 3s, so we'll be getting that 12.5% damage increase, the same as those strength 4 attacks would get when they're wounding on 3s. So to put it mildly, the Black Templars doctrine just isn't really going to help out Black Templars fighty characters with heavy weapons very much at all, unfortunately. So in summary, the Black Templars doctrine is going to be strongest when used with a whole bunch of chainsword attacks, or possibly with power swords, but you're not going to get too much benefit from it with any heavier war gear. So now we move on to the Blood Angels doctrine, which is Savage Echoes. Interestingly, this seems to differ from the other two, as it seems to apply even if your unit was charged, as well as if it either charged or made a heroic intervention. So that's quite a decent advantage over both the White Scars and the Black Templars. Now this is a very simple doctrine. Whenever it activates, you add 1 to the attacks characteristics for models in that unit until the end of the turn, and that's cumulative with Shock Assault. So the way that this one differs is that it will give a greater percentage damage increase to the units with the lower amount of attacks. So say if you've got some Blood Angels intercessors charging in against an unruly mob of Orc Boys, they'll normally have 3 attacks each on the charge due to Shock Assault, and with this they'll go up to 4 attacks each, which is a 33% increase in the number of attacks and therefore 33% damage increase. Now if we're targeting 1 wounds models, then this is obviously far better than the White Scars, who get no benefit, and it also handily outshines the Black Templars against toughness 3 or toughness 4 targets, though the Black Templars will win against toughness 5 ones. If we are hitting anything with 2 wounds or more though, then the White Scars doctrine will be stronger, as that's a flat 100% damage increase, which is massive. And of course, this applies against vehicles where the Black Templars doctrine doesn't, so it's always going to win against them there. The Blood Angels doctrine is also going to be particularly potent on high strength, low volume of attack units, such as Terminators. Again, they'll get 3 attacks on the charge with their Power Fists, so going up to 4 with this will be a 33% increase. Still not quite as good as the White Scars 50% increase against large targets, but if they are hitting anything with 2 wounds or less, then getting that extra attack will still be a 33% increase, whereas the White Scars won't have any advantage in having higher damage Power Fists against a unit with just 1 or 2 wounds. Finally, if we look at fighty characters, the doctrine isn't quite as strong a buff compared with the infantry due to the characters having more attacks at base. If we're looking at a classic Blood Angels captain with a Thunderhammer and Storm Shield charging into the enemy, he'll usually have 5 attacks base with Shock Assault, so going up to 6 attacks with this will be a 20% buff. Again, compared with the White Scars, it's not going to be quite as strong when you're fighting vehicles, as they have a 33% buff against them, but it'll be stronger against anything that has a low number of wounds where the White Scar's damage output doesn't come into effect. Obviously with the Blood Angels they also get a bonus on the charge with an additional bonus to their wound roll from their Red Thirst, and at the point of recording I haven't seen how that's going to change in the new codex, if at all. I'm certainly looking forward to Blood of Baal to find out, but I haven't been taking in chapter traits into this equation, because obviously it's hard to weigh up +1 to wound rolls against the White Scar's benefits to mobility and the Black Templars reroll charges. Obviously the Blood Angels hit harder, but the other chapters might be making more charges, so it's certainly not easy to directly compare the maths. So overall then, the White Scars are the kings whenever it comes to fighting vehicles or high toughness targets. The Black Templars are somewhat limited, with their buff only applying in any meaningful way to low strength weapons fighting non-vehicles, and the Blood Angels being a fairly consistent flat increase in damage output no matter what you're fighting, with the additional advantage that it activates when you're charged as well. In terms of which is strongest, I think that it's pretty close between the White Scars and the Blood Angels, and which one is actually stronger in any given battle will largely depend on how many tanks, monsters or heavy hitters there are in the army that you are playing against. Just on personal preference, I think that I prefer the Blood Angels one most, because it basically will give you the same buff against all targets, so you know how much damage each of your pieces is likely to do, and this isn't going to change on a target by target basis, and it isn't going to be a big swing depending on whether you wind up facing a tank army or a horde army. As I said at the start of the video though, there are far more factors to consider in your army selection other than combat doctrines, but I did think it would be interesting to see which of these provides the most utility on the tabletop. If you have any thoughts or opinions on which of these you think is best for your army and why, please let me know down in the comments. And as always, if I've made any rules errors, let me know down there too. Thanks for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to hear more content like this in the future, or to support me on Patreon if you are finding these videos useful. Thanks again, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.